U.S. Cardinals want you to give up your guns. Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Kyle Kopy and Dave Gordon. So I know there's several bishops who've called for this. People to voluntarily forego their Second Amendment rights. The one that comes to my mind is Cardinal Joseph Tobin. I know there's been some others recently, but Cardinal Joseph Tobin, who is the Metropolitan of Newark, New Jersey, said that people should voluntarily forego their Second Amendment rights for the betterment of society, because there have been so many, so-called mass shootings recently, like 300 this year, but how they define mass shooting is like, above 1.5 people or something crazy like that. And so Tobin's saying that, hey, how about everyone just voluntarily give up their guns? Dave, what do you think about that?
I mean, obviously that's preposterous. It's a ridiculous notion, and it's not even consistent. And we're going to get into this, obviously, but the people that would turn in their guns are clearly not the ones that would be perpetrating mass shootings. The people who are going to rush to the police station to turn over their expensive guns are going to be the ones that are law-abiding and liberal citizens. The liberal citizens that own guns, that think for whatever reason that an instrument, because a gun is an instrument, it's a tool, can of itself be bad. Those are the ones that are going to turn in guns. It's not going to be like gangsters in Chicago that are like, oh, I better turn this in. I never thought of it like that. I never realized that guns could be the culprit behind societal violence. Bishop Tobin, you have shown me the error of my ways, and I think I'm going to turn in my guns now. That's never going to happen. Like, what are these people thinking? That, like, the mafia, they're just going to be like, well, I was thinking I was going to get somebody whacked today. I was going to kill somebody, maybe shoot them in the face a few times. But now that I've heard this cardinal call for this, I'm not going to do that, and I'm just going to kind of change my life around. It's preposterous. It's going to disarm the good guys, so they're going to be vulnerable to being victims of crime themselves. And the bad guys are going to retain their guns and keep up with their violent ways. They're going to keep being scofflaws. They're going to keep being criminals. They're going to keep up the life of crime and violence. And then everybody who's good, or at least those useful idiots who are at least law-abiding and turned in their guns, they're going to be without defense. It's just typical liberal, non-thinking, emoting, masquerading as policy decision. It's like saying America should disarm itself from nuclear weapons, and we'll just let China and Russia, keep theirs, and maybe we'll set a good example for them, and they'll lay down their arms also. It's typical liberal stuff. It's been going on since the Cold War.
Yeah, Tobin is calling for what he says is voluntary self-restraint from the Second Amendment. And again, yes, it's the people who need the guns the most, the law-abiding citizens, who are, many of them won't do it. The American culture is a little bit different. We're going to talk about another incident or situation going on in Serbia where people are apparently turning in their guns based on a similar call there. But Americans, I don't think will do it. Americans are a little bit, they have a little bit more of a backbone, I think. We really pride ourselves on being American and having these certain rights. So I highly doubt that many of them would take up this call. It's like sort of come get these guns, out of my cold, dead hands type of thing.
Yeah, one would hope so, because there's nothing more primordial than the right to self-defense, whether it's from, bad guys, bad private citizens, or even government overreach, which is really the main reason that we have the Second Amendment in the Constitution of the United States. It's not quackery. It's not tinfoil hat stuff to point out that the Founding Fathers were very unanimous that the reason they wanted an armed populace was precisely to make it so that the government was afraid, particularly the federal government, to overstep its bounds, to overstep its constitutional powers, and to usher in tyranny, because they knew there was going to be a backlash from United States citizens who were armed and who could instill a proper government after that. So it's primordial that you have the right to defend yourself. And a gun is no more than a tool. It's like what Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow says in Pirates of the Caribbean, right? He's like, a ship is more than, boards and a sail and like wood and whatnot. What a ship is freedom. Sure, it's made of wood and it has a sail, but what a ship really is freedom. And what a gun really is self-protection and self-reliance. That's what a gun is. So any government, any official, any churchman who's trying to get you to turn in your guns is trying to make you less self-reliant and more reliant on the government, which again, we're going to see in a second, is not even legally accurate because the government doesn't have a duty to protect you at all. But they're trying to make you more reliant on the government, less self-reliant, and they're trying to destroy your primordial right to self-defense and your duty, the means by which you can accomplish your duty of protecting self, family, and country. And yes, country. It's precisely because we have a bunch of armed citizens that factored into the Japanese, to dissuading the Japanese from invading the United States, from attempting a land invasion of the United States in World War II, because they knew they were going to run into 275 million like armed, pseudo soldiers. But as we saw with COVID too, and I hate talking about like hunting and self-sufficiency because I think this gets straw-manned as like the main reason for the Second Amendment, which it's just so dumb. You'll hear the snarky liberals though be like, well, a deer, you don't need an AR-15 to shoot a deer. Well, again, that's not the purpose of the Second Amendment. It has nothing to do with hunting. The Founding Fathers said nothing about hunting. They didn't care about that. I mean, maybe they cared about it a little bit. That's not what they were talking about. The reason people should have access to arms like an AR-15 is precisely because that sort of, not military grade, but assault weapon style, man stopping type round is what would accomplish the Founding Fathers' vision of making an overstepping government most afraid of people. But going back to like the COVID era, we do see that you cannot rely on your economy to preserve life and limb, right? I mean, Kyle, you remember when the grocery stores were like empty? I took a picture of it on my phone when the grocery store shelves were empty right when COVID was starting out, and there was like no food in the Walmart near me in California. I don't know, do you remember that?
Yeah, and it gave people the sense of, well, maybe I'm wrong to think that just because I have money that I deserve to buy certain things and that they're always going to be there for me. Like the grocery store owes me something.
Right. I mean, modern man has gotten soft. We really think that we have like an entitlement to a grocery store stocked full of food, and we're really one small disaster. I mean, COVID wasn't even a big disaster, right? It didn't kill, all in all, like percentile-wise, that great a number of people. It was a relatively, it was a bigger virus than like, the cold and the flu, but it was a relatively minor virus. It's not Ebola that broke out, and that alone like gutted inventories. Can you imagine if there's an actual like nationwide disaster? I mean, you talk about countries that have the ability to perform like an electromagnetic pulse burst of a nuclear weapon, and that would wipe out the entire power grid for most of the country. And the casualties would be enormous, not because people would die of the nuclear bomb itself or of radiation, but because their cars wouldn't work anymore. They wouldn't have access to water anymore. So it would be people essentially dying of starvation and thirst, and they're not able to get to water and food to sustain themselves. And the stores, obviously, no trucks would work anymore. So you're talking about an all-out, like, cataclysmic scenario that we're watching right now with Russia and Ukraine fighting each other. The first instance in a long time of two European nations going to war with one another. it's not out of the question. Modern man is so soft that this stuff's all out of the question for us. But we saw COVID happen. I mean, what if there's a giant, I don't know, earthquake? There's some kind of war that breaks out. There's another nationwide virus that's a really serious virus this time, Ebola type stuff. You name it. There's a million different contingencies that could create disastrous circumstances in the United States economy and lead to veritable food and drink shortages. And you have about 3 days of being able to go to the local store and pick up groceries based on existing stock.
Yeah, I've always heard that, like, after the 3-day mark, then stuff is starting to get real.
Yeah. So how are you going to eat? I mean, you're going to have to start hunting, not just deer with, like, a big caliber rifle or something, but you actually have to start eating rabbits, rodents, a lot of avian life. Famously, survivalists talk about how big game is not enough to sustain you. So you have to have access to various types of guns to bring those things down, to bag those kinds of animals with any kind of regularity. Try trapping a bird, try trapping a rabbit. Obviously, it's done. It's just to have a steady supply of that, hunting and kicking them up. That's the way to go. And to say we should voluntarily lay down our arms, it's like, well, what if the economy falls out, let alone like defending yourself from inner city like criminals and trash that are going to perpetrate crimes, and making the government afraid of us. Let's leave that aside for now. What if it's like the next COVID but more severe? What if we actually have to go to the shit hits the fan location and fend for ourselves?
Yeah, and in that situation, as you mentioned, you're going to need self-defense. And if all the, goody two-shoes law-abiding citizens said, oh, yeah, we'll go along with this plan and we'll give you our guns, as you said, the criminals are not going to have done that. They will have retained their guns. So all the good guys are going to be out-armed, and the criminals, likely didn't have legal guns anyways. They probably had the 6-shooter with the serial number scratched off. I mean, they're not going into gun stores and getting these things and like, oh yeah, this is totally traceable when I use it in the murder type of thing. No, they're obtaining these, on the black market or whatever. So that they're not going to turn them in, nor are they track downable in any sense because they didn't buy them legally.
Dude, think about this for a second. Because this is a real thing, like a real thought experiment. And just if gun control could work, what I'm about to say would make sense. But if gun control would work, it assumes that criminals follow laws, and that if you ban guns, criminals are going to be like, well, I better follow the law and, not have a gun. And I better take my guns and turn them in at the local police station. So that's the assumption with gun control, right? But if we follow the assumption that criminals follow laws, all you have to do is pass a law that says don't use a gun to perpetrate any crime. And that would, in and of itself, end all gun crime and gun violence, right?
Yeah, so we should consider doing that.
Yeah, seriously, I guess the Democrats just didn't think about that. Tobin, whatever, same thing. That escaped him. He just straight over his head. But like that is the logic. They don't understand that is the actual logic at play. But I think your point is excellent, dude. It's that even if if the stuff hits the fan and you have to go to like your secret in the middle of the woods hideout and really be like locked down, take care of your family, hunt, scrap for survival, filter your own water, all that kind of stuff. And we're really in there's a nightmare worldwide or at least nationwide scenario where you're on your own. You do have to worry about looting and whatnot. We've seen that too. Remember like Hurricane Katrina and New Orleans and the looting and rioting with Antifa and BLM in the wake of like George Floyd? Like those things happen. And there's tons of acts of violence. Think about the people we heard of getting killed by Antifa members either stomped to death or even shot. And the police couldn't go into these certain zones. You know, police couldn't react or respond to certain zones. Remember Chaz and stuff.
Yeah, well,
but
even the
people were
LA
calling-
riots in the 1990s was a similar situation. The looting, the random people getting killed, like if you were white and you were driving a semi-truck and you came into one of these areas, you were pulled out, or even if you were Asian, you were stomped to death sometimes. Like it's a thing happened. I think that came off the Rodney King police incident, and so the solution to that was apparently go steal TVs and stuff and start killing people.
Yeah, obviously. But the first thing, like if there's like an EMP burst, obviously you're going to need television.
Yeah. Yes.
Even though there's no electricity.
You will need it, and you will need your, the latest LeBron shoes or whatever, probably as well.
Get those spinners. Get them spinners, dog.
Yeah. No, you need that. It's weird that Tobin uses the phrase self-restraint from the Second Amendment like it's a temptation that we need to curb. Like I'm fiending for those guns, and I have to restrain myself, man. I'm tweaking for the guns right now, but I will voluntarily self-restrain myself for the betterment of society.
Right. Like as if people who are just have their guns like locked away safely right now, as I do, like all of a sudden I might get a hankering just to like go mad and like commit a bunch of crimes with it. Like that's gonna happen. Like every gun that's out there is just waiting to go off in some random direction and kill some random person. It's really ridiculous. You can tell he has no experience with guns. He has no experience with the mindset that would go into responsible gun ownership. Like, hey, I'm a father of a family. And if I get up in the middle of the night, I don't want to be like the dork in the movie that has to like go get a baseball bat, even though he's thinking armed assailants broke into his house, where he's literally bringing a bat to a gunfight, possibly. Like he's never had any of these experiences. And my house did get broken into, by the way, by an illegal alien who'd been deported several times when I was a kid growing up in Texas. And he had like the better part of our stuff loaded in his car when the cops came. So that like crime happens, and like most people have been at some level a victim of at least a non-insignificant crime, I would say, either whether it's their car getting broken into or the house being broken into. It's not really uncommon. It's quite common to be a victim of crime. So the fact is, like, these things happen. You have to be ready for them. Yeah, what I was going to say a second ago was just if the stuff does hit the fan, like people start looting, you have to be able to defend against that sort of thing where like the police presence just doesn't exist and you have to look after yourself. But even today, in functioning civil society, right? No great disaster has taken place. Everything for now is accounted for. We do have functioning police forces. We do have functioning like emergency medical and fire personnel, and local governments are they're finely oiled machines. They're cranking along right now, yada yada. But even in today's day and age, you still have to have a gun because government, police have no duty to you as an individual. So you hear the brain dead liberals a lot, right, Kyle? I mean, what do they say when you're like, well, I need a gun to protect my family? What's the stock reply to that from our dim-witted liberal friends?
Well, they would probably say something like, well, what are the cops for? The cops are going to protect me, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the first response to that is, well, you're in a position where seconds matter. Somebody is in your house and could literally come into your room and shoot you up, and the police are minutes away. So there's that famous rejoinder, right? In a situation where seconds matter, police are minutes away. But even if you wanted to roll the dice on that, you are an ignoramus, because the police it's well adjudicated. It's not some quack court. It's well established in American jurisprudence that the police have no duty to you as an individual person. None. Zero. Zilch. They don't have to respond. If you call the cops And they think that their resources are spent elsewhere. You could have a murderer in your house, and you say, "Excuse me, officer, 911, there's somebody in my house. He's pointing a gun at me, and he's saying in 5 minutes he's going to shoot me. You need to respond." If there's some other situation, the police can just say, "Look, we have to allocate our resources in the most responsible way, and we're not going to send anyone out to help you." And this has been adjudicated. It's been adjudicated actually several times, so that it's basically just axiomatic in the law now that, lawyers know this stuff. Lawyers know that police don't have a duty to the private citizen. They only have a duty to discharge their responsibilities in the community, to the community at large. So if you get lucky, they think your situation is worth responding to, and they come out and they save your wimpy little ass from like the home invader or whatever. But here's the case. Look it up. Warren versus District of Columbia. Famous case. It's a D.C. Court of Appeals, 1981. And what happened in this case was there were 3 women, and they were at home, and 2 men broke into their building, their home. And they went into one woman's room and actually, started assaulting her, sexually assaulting her. Horrible thing. And the 2 roommates could hear her screaming, so they called the police. And the police like, "Yeah, we're on our way. We're gonna come out. We're gonna check it out." They're like, "There's a burglary in process right now. It's going on right now. We can hear our roommate screaming. Yada yada." Police drive by. They look out their window. They don't do a thorough investigation, and they leave the premises without, going in and taking care of the business. So the guys are still in there assaulting and raping this roommate. Then the women call back, and they call the cops again, and they're like, "What are you doing? There's this crime in progress." And again, they're assured, "Oh yeah, we're going to send somebody out." And the dispatcher I don't even think it gets re-dispatched, but they call it, just investigating suspicious circumstances. They didn't even investigate it as a burglary. So it was like, cops aren't up there like banging at the door and doing a warrantless entry because of exigent circumstances. And police can enter into a house under exigent circumstances, meaning if they think there is a crime in progress, somebody's in imminent danger of like losing their life. They can do that without a warrant and go in. The police they weren't on like DEFCON 4 or whatever. They just, they kind of looked at this as a suspicious circumstance, didn't turn up anything, and left. And then these 2 guys, they found the other 2 women, and for like the next couple of days, they assaulted them, raped them, all terrible things. And all these women eventually are released and then go to the court and try and sue the police department for a breach of duty to them. And the courts say, sorry, I'll read it. I'm going to read it to you. This is the opinion from the court. Here's the important line that you need to know about when they are saying, get lost. There's nothing you can do. We are going to uphold the district court's grant of summary judgment. This is what they say. This uniformly accepted rule rests upon the fundamental principle that a government and its agents are under no general duty to provide public services, such as police protection, to any particular individual citizen. The government does not have any duty to protect you. It doesn't. And this is not a standalone case, like I said. This is the rule. So you can't You have no right to call the police. You have no right to have them respond to your situation and rescue you. Well, it's horrifying, right? So with that in mind, you need a gun. Like, if you don't have a gun, that's irresponsible. Like, you have to have a gun. How are you going to protect your family if something like this happens? Which happens sometimes. Like I said, I had an illegal immigrant with a crowbar come into my house when my brothers were at home when I was a little kid. And my brothers called the cops and ran out of the house to a neighbor's house.
Did they take you away? They left you in the house?
No. I was out shopping with my mom when it happened.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, I was just hiding out like in the... No, I mean, right, Kyle? What the... Dude! Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is, it's not only a right to bear arms. As you said, it's more of a duty, especially if you're a father of a household, or just even for your own personal protection, that you weren't prepared in the case of something going wrong. It's like, having a parachute in case your plane breaks down, sort of a thing. It's a thing that you have just in case. Hopefully, God forbid, you'll never have to use it. Hopefully that's the case. But it's there just in case. And if worst comes to worst and you do have to use it, it is there, and hopefully you're trained in how to use it. But yeah, to look back on an incident like that and say, yeah, we had no way to protect ourselves, and we should have, we could have, we had every opportunity to learn about it and obtain a gun and get trained in it and all that, and I failed to do so, and therefore that's kind of on you.
Why wouldn't you have a gun? It boggles the mind, because we know there's crime out there. We know that the economy can break down. We saw it with COVID. Forget about toilet paper. Like, it was hard to find a lot of goods in the economy, especially toilet paper. But there were a lot of things that just went AWOL in the economy that you couldn't find in the stores after the first 3 days of when they were, like, locking us down, or like a zombie apocalypse. It was like all you could get was, dregs. There was nothing. So it's like, why wouldn't you have it? And people are like, well, because their kids could find them and hurt themselves. It's like, that's never happened. My oldest daughter is 11 now, and I have a lot of guns, and they've never even come close to crossing paths in an untoward way. Like, you just keep them locked up. And you also tell your kids, like, if you were ever to try and access my guns when they're locked away, and to, like, play with them when I didn't give you permission to handle them with my supervision, where I'm giving, like, serious oversight, if you ever touch them, you're going to be in the biggest trouble of your life, because you're putting all of our lives at risk. You do hear the stories, though, of, like, the rednecks cleaning their guns and they go off. Like, how the hell a gun goes off when you're cleaning it, that just blows the mind. But I've actually read stories about that. But, like, don't be that guy. But if you have any modicum of common sense, this isn't going to be a problem for you. Like I said, I have tons of guns. I have tons of kids, too. And they've never illicitly crossed paths, because you have to be careful with it, because that, yeah, it's a tool. It's a tool that could be very deadly, and it could kill you. So you have to treat it with caution. You have to treat it with respect. But that being said, you treat it with caution and respect, and then you have this tool that is going to possibly save you and your entire family. Stuff happens all the time. Think about, in just the last, 150 years of American history, think about all the times where a gun would really come in handy. The Great Depression. You hear people about, shooting and eating robins and stuff during the Great Depression. Yeah, times were tough. Think about all of the things that, all of the riots, the Watts riots, even pre-Rodney King, but all the riots in Detroit, for example. We just came off BLM and Antifa in the wake of George Floyd. And then just, what about, man-made disaster? Well, COVID might be a man-made disaster. But things like COVID, acts of God, and you just have to survive. There's no reason not to. And as a matter of fact, it used to be seen as an affirmative duty. In early America, many states had laws that said able-bodied men of service age need to own a gun so they can join a militia if they need to be in one, to put down, rebellions and stuff. Remember, Shays' Rebellion? It brought the Republic to, a standstill. How these things happen. It's not far off. We just saw a mutiny that was about to take place in Russia. Stuff happens. You should be prepared. So at the state level, they used to see it as a duty to own guns. That's not Kyle and Dave. That's American law, American history.
Yeah, and people are just kind of willfully blind to that, given the comforts of contemporary society, I think. you said you have a lot of kids and a lot of guns. I think it's probably a good rule of thumb that you have one gun per kid. People should probably go with that. And going along with the responsible parent thing, like that's all it takes for your kids to remain safe around your firearms, is that you tell them about them, you give them, the consequences if those are broken. The rare incidents that we see about, the kid found his dad's gun and he brought it to school or whatever that is, they don't tell us the circumstances around that. It's usually something like, well, it was an illegal gun, or it's like, you just had like some absent parents who just left the gun lying around all over the place. These things are rare, but they do happen, but they're always preventable. It's never like the kid found out the combination and subverted his dad's, fingerprint thing. It's like, no, none of that stuff ever happens. It's always irresponsible parents who leave these things out, and then sometimes bad things happen.
Yeah, I mean, you know what a really good analogy is? And I hate bad analogies because they actually, if they get regurgitated too much, then they actually weaken your whole side's argument. But, a really good analogy that's much closer, that would fit, it's much more apropos for Tobin's letter that we're referencing here, where he's like, well, we got to just turn in our guns because it's just an unnecessary safety risk to, the community, as if, you're locked up. Guns owned by a responsible citizen are just going to start shooting on their own and killing people. What an actual good analogy would be, and if he really believes his own logic and his own line of reasoning in his letter, he would be advocating for getting rid of pools, because pools kill a crap load of people in the United States. Not as many as guns. A lot of people bandy about pools kill more people in the United States than guns. That's not exactly true, but they kill, I think it's about a third of the amount of people that guns do. And pool deaths are, they're legitimately accidental. Drowning is legitimately accidental. And drowning really does affect kids, even when a family's trying to be responsible and has a pool gate and keeps it locked and all that stuff. Sometimes kids can circumnavigate that and fall in and God forbid, drown. But that's a legitimate accident. That's something if you're really concerned about the loss of life in the United States due to just kind of needless accidents, pools, you don't need one for your own protection like you do a gun. You don't need one to fend off the federal government, per the founding fathers, if it's ever overstepping its bounds. You don't need one if stuff ever hits the fan and Ebola starts happening. It's well, honey, I'm glad we have that pool. I guess you have a little bit of water, but I'm glad we got that pool so I can do laps during this Ebola crisis.
Yeah.
No,
I'll try to stomach the chlorinated water.
Yeah, exactly. No, totally. You don't need a pool. It's a complete luxury. It's something that does kill significant amounts of children. The gun statistics, I'd be willing to wager. Now, I'm not sure of this, but I would be willing to wager as an educated guess that many more children die in pools than die by gun violence. So pools are a significant proportion of, the deaths from gun violence. Pools are a significant amount of that. They kind of rival. I think, like I said, it's about a third, if memory serves. But that's of all gun violence. For kids who die in a pool each year versus kids who die from a gun each year, I'd be willing to wager that more kids actually die in a pool. Maybe I'll look this up next time Kyle's talking.
Yeah.
And but that's a safe bet. So if you're really concerned, like Tobin is, nighty-night baby Tobin, really concerned about that loss of life, then he'd be advocating for getting rid of pools. There's no need for a pool. You do need a gun. No one ever breaks into your house and you're like, we got this pool, I'm going to push the burglar into it and drown his butt. But you need your gun. Right? Do I have someone here?
I think so. I'm getting the strange image, and I want this out of my head, but I'm getting the strange image of Joseph Tobin in a pool, which no one wants to see. No one wants to see that. But continuing on with some of the stuff that he's talking about, Tobin says, Let's voluntarily set aside our rights in order to witness the truth that only peace and never violence is the way to build a free society. Is that even true? That's not even true. You need measured amounts of violence to ensure peace. It's one of those paradoxes of just the human existence, is that war ensures peace at times, is that you need to use coercive force to fend off an attacker. So we fight to ensure peace in terms of our soldiers and whatnot. It's a paradox, but these things are necessary. So you can't get peace just with peace. You have to actually sometimes use a measured amount of violence to achieve your peace.
Sure. No, of course. What thing has a gun in human history ever solved? Some dingbat out there is wondering that. Like, well, aside from communism and Nazism and, nothing except for like the greatest atrocities ever. Yeah, obviously, as long as bad guys have guns, good guys need guns, right? That's just basic math. For every bad guy that has a gun, you need more good guys that have guns. And that's exactly the concept that goes into police work, actually. You need more police than you have bad guys, and the bad guys have to know that if they take down a policeman, that there are more in line that are going to come catch them and punish them. Otherwise, you have frontier-style living, where bad guys just kill the lawman and can run amok. So this is like an actual core tenet of policing, and this is why police go after cop killers so much. And there's that mentality. I mean, there's, of course, the element of maybe being out for a little bit of revenge, but it's also more theoretical than that. If people think that they can kind of go lethal weapon and start killing cops with impunity and like knock off or intimidate a police force, then you actually have a situation where you've lost control of society. So you need more good guys with guns than bad guys with guns. That's just a fact, because otherwise you're going to lose control of either your country, your state, your society. Yeah,
one has to definitely outweigh the other.
Okay, so Kyle, when you were bringing up that good point, I looked into this. Now, this is skewed, and I forgot about this when I brought up my point, but apparently about 900 kids drown every year. More than that die in gun-related incidents. But remember, kid is defined as somebody that's under 18. So you have like 14-year-olds in South Chicago shooting each other up in gang violence.
Yeah, I mean...
So I was thinking like innocent kids, not like gangsters.
Right. Yeah, you have kids, if it's under 18, you have kids who are still technically minors, still technically teenagers, who have grown bodies, who have already joined their neighborhood gang, and have been initiated into, whatever gun violence there is there. So yeah, it's not a fair comparison.
Sure, but there are 4,000 unintentional drowning deaths each year in the United States. That's a significant, obviously, amount of loss of life. I'm looking up just the raw statistics. I'm trying to see if I was right, where I was saying that's a third of gun violence deaths. So give me, while you forge ahead, I'm going to look that up too.
Sure, yeah. And I would venture to say that of those it's 900 pool-related deaths for children, right?
Yeah.
Of those 900, I would, even without seeing the stats on it, I would venture to say that those are very young aged children, elementary school and below. Your 3-year-old falls in the pool, he doesn't know how to swim. Obviously, I would say I would bet that it's mostly, lower ages like that.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
But yeah, you're still looking it up so I can continue on.
20, there were 20,000 murders about, so about a fifth. Okay. So drowning is about a fifth of gun murders. That's a serious amount. And a lot of that, again, is going to be like gang crime, gang on gang stuff. So people who are kind of complicit in the gun culture. This isn't just random people being like gunned down in the streets. These are like people who are basically living like lawless savages, in a gang lifestyle, blowing each other away. It's a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to make these comparisons.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Another strange thing that Tobin tries to do is he tries to connect his whole call for turning in your guns to actually the Synod on Synodality. He says this call is part of a synodal effort to actively resist gun violence. First of all, I didn't know that the Synod had anything to do with gun violence. He claims that it's, in the Synod you listen and you get input from other people, and there's sort of a period where you're trying to figure out things to do to curb whatever problem comes your way. But then there's this whole active phase, and you have to do something. And so apparently what he came up with is what you have to do is turn over your guns.
Yeah.
I don't get how this is like, an ecclesiastical thing in any way.
Well, no, it's ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, the Synod and Synodality's touching on gun violence? Like, this is what parishioners are bringing forward? I thought it was like church women wanting to be priests and stuff, and, homosexuals wanting to receive the Eucharist and get gay blessings. Where did gun violence come from? Where did that enter into the picture? I mean, like, is it just a Trojan horse for, like, every liberal cause? And, of course, a lot of people in the church would say that the Synod is about things that actually affect, like, normal Catholics, not the, heterodox, heretic-style Catholics. Not the National Catholic Reporter style of Catholic, but the actual rank and file who believe, the church's teachings. The church is supposed to be speaking to them, too, and ministering to them. Like, if you go to just your random Catholic parish, gun violence really ain't on the list of priorities. These are people living, pretty upright lives. They're worried about providing for their families, worried about bringing kids up in the faith, raising kids that don't fall away. Gun violence is not, that's like a third world problem where for us, by analogy, that's not a problem people in my parish are really dealing with.
No, yeah, for most of the country it isn't, unless you're living in these sort of leftist, lawless cities like Chicago. They call it Chirac, again, sort of like making the analogy that it is a third world country because, it's every weekend. It's like, 20 people got shot here, and then, 10 more people got shot the next weekend. Or even, LA to some degree, with the homelessness problem and violence there. So it's these, large blue cities that these things are happening in. But for most of the country, no, it's just not the case.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess this is more confirmation that this whole synodal process is really going to be used and weaponized as something to just shoehorn every liberal cause du jour into. I mean, yeah, the fact that the bishops are speaking to this, you can't really explain it. For one, because we know that the church's traditional teaching about the Father, and if you look especially at our devotion to like Saint Joseph, and you look at your Saint Joseph novena, we extol him for protecting his family, for taking care of his family, for being protector, provider. He's recently with the consecration to Saint Joseph book that's come out, we've gotten away from seeing Joseph, which I think it's a good thing. And I think a lot of us conjured up images of our mind of Joseph as like, a feeble old man or something like that. But now it puts into our mind more the idea of Joseph as the virile protector and provider that is serving as like the human model for masculinity for the Christ child. We extol the virtue of the father of the family being protector. And for someone like, Tobin to come along and call basically for fathers in a culture that, the gun has been invented. You can't uninvent something. And we wouldn't want to anyway, because the gun has many very good, very useful, very salutary applications. Hunting being one. But obviously, putting an end to criminality and tyranny being other very important things, calling for fathers to voluntarily disarm themselves, which is really, if you go back to our analysis a minute ago, especially keeping in mind that the police have no duty to protect you and your family, for fathers to voluntarily disarm themselves is an irresponsible act. And here you have a prelate who's supposed to be a safeguard of the deposit of faith. And the deposit of faith tells us, yes, that men have a duty to protect their families and to provide for their families. You have him leading people into error, leading men to default on their duty as protector to their families. That's a despicable thing. All in the name of what? Because Tobin's a Democrat? Like, is that what this is? He's just into partisan politics? Or he's just shilling? He's so brainwashed by whatever publications he's reading because of perhaps his political sensibilities, his errant political sensibilities, that he's just shilling these party lines that are of no benefit. There's no rational use to anybody of sound mind and goodwill. Like, no one of sound mind and goodwill can advocate for gun control. It's evil. It's really, really bad. Like, it's not an exaggeration or pure hyperbole to be like, that's a very dangerous policy to advocate for. And it's like a machination of statists. It's a machination of the state to be like, yeah, citizens, disarm yourselves. This is what the British tried to do to the American colonists. They tried to get gun control so that the American colonists who legally owned arms would turn in their weapons so that there would, they wouldn't be a threat to the tyrannical crown. It's a machination of the state and the agents of the state and the useful idiots that mindlessly regurgitate the propaganda of the agents of the state to say this thing. I don't think a person of goodwill can be like, disarm yourself. And actually, we are going back to that. The government does not have the authority or the duty to protect you. Here's a New York Times article that talks about this in the wake of Stoneman Douglas, that massacre, where you have students actually in the custody of a public school, and the public school did not have a duty to look after their safety. And the New York Times is quoting here a professor of law at University of Florida School of Law, Darren L. Hutchinson, and he says this: neither the Constitution nor state law impose a general duty upon police officers or other governmental officials to protect individual persons from harm, even when they know the harm will occur. So this is like, one of the evils of our day and age is trying to get the state to supplant the father. And we see this with the rise of the welfare state, especially in the wake of like the Lyndon Johnson administration and the Great Society policies that brought about a lot of the planks of the modern welfare state. You're trying to replace the father with the state. And like, here you have it. Like, just trust the police, and they're going to take care of you. They'll be your guard. The fathers, you don't have to protect your family. That's our duty. That's the state's duty. The state can raise your kids. They're everybody's kids. That Biden line, But everybody acknowledges, everybody who knows better, i.e., not the dumb, unwashed masses, but everybody who's in the know knows that the state doesn't even have to do this. So what guys like Tobin are doing, they're really just they're harming the American family. They're destroying the American patriarch, disarming the American patriarch, neutering the American patriarch, and leaving the American family vulnerable and unprotected.
Yeah, and he talked about agents of the state carrying out this state agenda. And look no further, if you're looking at agents of the state, than the U.S. hierarchy. Most of them are, just in bed with the Democrats. They receive a boatload of funding for them under the guise of, social justice or whatever it is, but it all goes towards things like leftist causes, increasing illegal immigration, And going along with this issue, gun control and countless other issues. So it would be no surprise that someone like Tobin and some of his counterparts, some of his fellow bishops in the U.S. hierarchy, are going to be pushing with this type of stuff. Now I want to end on this. Tobin says in a recent letter, I think this is the letter where he's actually calling for you to turn in your guns. He ends by saying this. He says, we want to pray for an end to all instances of violence. Now, at first it seems like a very salutary prayer. But my question is, it's sort of like praying for is that sort of like praying for an end to poverty worldwide? Doesn't that go against something our Lord said? And he said, the poor will always be with you. Yes, we want to pray for these people will be fed, maybe particular instances where someone might be protected. But to think that, our prayers would bring about a worldwide peace, I call that into question. I don't think the world will ever be totally peaceful. Yes, God could do that if he so wished. He could, obviously make anything as perfect as it could be if he wanted to. But I don't think that'll happen. So to make these general prayers, like end all violence, I think is a little, I don't know. What do you think about that, Dave?
Yeah, I think, I see where you're coming from. I might have a little bit of a different take. And this is where I think we can look to God's universal salvific will, and the fact also that, his permissive will when it comes to allowing suffering and evil, because he knows he's so good that he can bring even good out of great evil. And his omniscience, knowing that, there will be suffering always, and there will always be the poor. God does say, you'll always have the poor with you. So we know that there will always be the poor. Now, does that mean that God wills people to be in destitution? No. I think God, obviously, because he is pure justice, wills for there to be a just distribution, not equitable, but just distribution of the goods of this earth, so that they are given to people and are plentiful for people to sustain themselves, as that's what the goods of the earth are for. They are at our disposal for the sustenance of the human race. So God knows that there's going to be poverty. God knows that there will always be violence until the second coming. But I'd say he does not will them. And actually he would probably will, I would think, for us to combat them. So I think praying for an end to poverty, praying for an end to disordered violence, those are things you can do because you could be in harmony with the divine will. Obviously, as long as you're praying in harmony with the divine will, you're in a safe spot. But even though that there will always be the poor with us and there will always be violence, but in some way perhaps you're helping to mitigate those things, just like we pray for the salvation of all men, even though and God has a universal salvific will, even though we know that not everybody's going to accept the graces of Christ and be saved. And if you believe Holy Writ, which we do, many will be lost and only few will be saved, because many will tread the easy, wide path that leads to destruction, and only few will tread the narrow path that leads to eternal life.
Well said. So I think, Cardinal Tobin, apparently your solution to ending all instances of violence is going to be for normal citizens to give up the means to protect themselves. All right.
Kyle, can I give one more point here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Super briefly.
Sure.
I think it's absurd to call for an end to gun violence by saying we need to just confiscate guns or you need to voluntarily turn in your guns. If Tobin is really concerned with this, which I don't think he is. Again, he's not worried about pools. He's for whatever reason, for liberals, gun deaths are much worse than drowning deaths. They're much worse than pool deaths. If it's a gun death, it's much worse than if somebody stabs you with a butcher knife. It's like, yeah, Bill was killed last week. We lost him. This terrible incident. Really, how did he go? Well, he was stabbed. That's not a big deal. But Sammy, he was shot, and it's like, oh my gosh, the horror. You know, if he's serious about ending violence, though, disordered violence, then he'd be serious about reining in sexual immorality, Kyle, because that's the font of it, because that's what breaks down the family. You have sexual immorality, which gives rise to fatherlessness, and fatherlessness is the greatest predictor of criminality. 3/4 of everybody who's in prison right now comes from a single mother. 3/4. 3/4. If Tobin, if the liberal bishop posse were really concerned with ending violence, they would be absolutely calling for a return to biblical, Christian, apostolic sexual morality. But quite the opposite. This is 99 baby Tobin. And, you know, he's on a crusade for, like, you know, recognizing sodomites as really special snowflakes who deserve to be welcomed and patted on the ass and, like, told to come into the church and don't be ashamed of their aberrant lifestyles. So, I mean, I just don't see it, dude. That's my final shtick. Sorry.
No, yeah, totally good. Yeah, he seems to be more concerned about having, I think he was the one that had the male model living with him, under the guise of, this guy's just staying with me because he's taking classes at this particular college. You know, we definitely stay in separate rooms.
You don't have any male models living with you, Kyle? Underwear models?
Occasionally, if they need to study and they need a place to study, I'll allow them to come in, but not usually.
Right. I let them sleep in my office.
Yeah. Give them a good. As long as they turn in their guns, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Seriously.
All right, everyone. That's about all the time we got. Thanks for joining us. Please like, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video. Consider donating to us, supporting this channel in the Patreon link below. And we'll see you next time. God bless you.